Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone, depending on what part of the world you're in. This is the monthly Roundtable breakfast, co-sponsored by the Association for Conflict Resolution of Greater New York and the City University of New York Dispute Resolution Center at John Jay College of Criminal Justice. I'm Maria Volpe. I'm a professor at John Jay and happy to welcome all of you here. Since 9/11, when I started these breakfasts, we've met in two formats. Until March 2020, we met at John Jay College every month on the first Thursday of the month. When the pandemic hit, starting April 2020, we moved the breakfast to this online format. And we continue. These breakfasts are recorded each month, and the recordings are posted on two websites, ACR-GNY.org and www.jjay.cuny.edu/dispute resolution. Each month, these breakfasts are convened and hosted and put together by an amazing team behind the scenes that consists of Julie Denny, Matthew Latimer, Nikki Borofsky, Emily Skinner, and Chloe Choi. It's great to be part of this group. I want to take just 1 minute to share that Julie will be moving on after serving as a co-convener since 2007. If it wasn't for Julie, we might not be here. In 2007, I thought, after 6 years of meeting every month, it was time for us to all move on. And Julie was then president of ACR-GNY, and she said, we can't let this institution stop at this point, and encouraged me to keep going with the understanding that ACR-GNY would become a co-sponsor. And so if it wasn't for Julie, we might not be here today. Thank you so much, Julie, for everything you've done behind the scenes. She prepared all the announcements, sent them out, and introduced the speakers each month. Today will be the last time she says that she's going to introduce the speaker. Julie, thanks again. And today we are thrilled to have with us Cynthia LeMay, who will talk about millennials and intergenerational conflict in the workplace. We are thrilled to have you here with us, Julie. This is a most timely and important topic, and we all have lots to learn and share about our own lived experiences on this important topic. So to introduce Cynthia, I am going to say for the last time, Julie, take it away.
Thank you, Maria. Dr. Cynthia Pierce LeMay is a senior level researcher and author of a recently published book on intergenerational conflict in the workplace. Her book is titled Millennials and Conflict in the Workplace: Understand the Unique Traits of the Now Generation. Her current research is focused on conflict resolution, intergenerational conflict, and the millennial generation, many of whom I hope will be on this morning. During her career, Cynthia has held senior level positions with Fortune 500 companies where she negotiated billion-dollar agreements, participated in union negotiations, and led a human resources department. She has lifetime certification as a senior professional in human resources and is a certified mediator. Cynthia also holds a PhD from Kennesaw State University, where she teaches in the business school while continuing her consulting and training business. I have to say, Cynthia, as probably the oldest person on this Zoom meeting, I look forward to hearing what you have to say about intergenerational conflict, and thank you all for your good wishes. Cynthia, take it away.
Oh, thank you, Julie, and I'm so honored to have been introduced by you. This final time you'll do introductions, so thank you. But good morning, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here. First and foremost, I would like to thank the Association for Conflict Resolution of Greater New York and John Jay College for hosting this wonderful event and for inviting me to participate today. So I'm going to start off by sharing my screen. I will pause a few times throughout the presentation to ask for questions, but we will have a significant amount of time at the end of the presentation for questions as well. So we'll just see how it goes as we go through. But I want to make sure everyone can see the presentation. Does everyone now see the presentation? If you could give me some feedback.
I think you want to close the slides on the left.
All right, come on.
You want to select slideshow up at the top of your
Yep.
screen.
I was trying to get it on the bottom and I'm not getting it. Slideshow, got it. You see it now?
There you go.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect.
All right, the technological challenges of older generations in the workplace.
Thank you.
Yeah. So millennials and managing intergenerational conflict in the workplace. As I was working throughout my career, I did notice the significant differences in styles between different generations. And some of the problems as newer generations came into the workplace as far as integrating into an existing workplace culture. So today I'd like to talk about different generations, like who are these different generations in the United States, some of the generational differences, the different conflict styles that I've done research on, and the impact of gender, how gender impacts our conflict styles. Then we'll look at millennials at work, what younger generations really want and value in a workplace, and how to implement strategies for success. And if we have time, we can look at a quick case study. So who are these generations? I like to start out with George Orwell's quote, "Each generation imagines itself to be more intelligent than the one that went before it and wiser than the one that comes after it." How true is that? So who are baby boomers? Baby boomers were born 1946 to 1964. Right now in the US, there are about 73.5 million baby boomers. Following the baby boomers are Generation X, born 65 to 81, and there are about 71 million of Generation X in the workplace today. The generation that preceded baby boomers is called the silent generation. I won't talk very much about them because there's only about 1.3 million or 20 million of the silence left in the workplace today, or in the world. Millennials, this is the big generation, 85.2 million. I would tell you that as generations are forming, the actual beginning and end dates are not definitive. So some organizations have already changed these dates to end as early as 1997 or 98. Others are still using this definition, which is the US Census Bureau definition of 1982 to 2000. And then the generation that's coming after millennials are Gen Zs. Again, a little bit smaller generation anticipated of about 67.6 million. So a little bit different. So we know millennials are the largest cohort. So this is what it looks like, just to give you a graphic view. You can see how big this millennial generation is and how they are really impacting our world. Then, if we look at projecting populations, which I find fascinating, I went and gathered all kinds of data on the projections from the US Census Bureau. It's not until 2041 that Gen Z will overtake millennials. So millennials have 18 more years as the majority in the US. So a lot of people say, you know, how powerful are millennials? Why do we really care about millennials? I think you probably all remember the horrific Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School shooting in Parkland, Florida on February 14th, 2018. Just a horrific shooting. On the left is Laura Ingraham, who is a Fox reporter who did a lot of reporting at that time. And on the right, David Hogg, who was a student at the time and was just incredibly impacted, obviously, by the shooting, and who did a lot of media spots about stopping gun violence. So what happened was Laura Ingraham had done some tweets about Parkland survivor David Hogg when he was talking about not getting into colleges of his choice. He had a very high GPA, very good scores, and he wasn't getting into some colleges. And Laura Ingraham tweeted about it. He didn't like what she had to say. And then Hogg called on his estimated 650,000 Twitter followers to boycott advertisers. Hard for me to even imagine. I remember being in college, it's like, we're going to do a petition. And, we got 100 signatures. We're like, yay, 650,000 followers. And you can imagine the compound effect of that. As a result, several major advertisers pulled ads from Fox, TripAdvisor, Hulu, Nestle, Wayfair, Nutrish, Expedia, Johnson & Johnson. The power of millennials in our younger generation. So what are we looking at in the labor force? I wanted to look at this too, because millennial majority, you can see the orange line are the millennials, and you can see that they're creating a new organizational culture. This generation has come into the workforce in great numbers. So we actually have 5 generations in the workplace, because we also have the Gen Zs that are entering the workplace now, and we still have some silence. So 5 generations with differences in personalities and values. And we know the large millennial generation is redefining that workplace, and then intergenerational differences can cause conflict. So this is where we are. I want to talk a little bit about generational studies, because it was important for me to really understand how to correctly and robustly do generational research. So we heard from Mannheim back in 1952. He had come up with a theory that individuals born in the same time frame and experiencing the same events develop similar traits. So that generational cohorts are really shaped by events they experienced during their formative years. And they provide a way then for us to study change over time. And then we know that differences can be due to cohort or to age. Is it just because someone's younger or someone's older that they're acting that way? Or is it really attributable to the generational cohort and the things that they experience and the unique traits that they have? So what we find is studies that employ theoretical rigor do find evidence of generational cohort differences. Knowing that, I really decided I wanted to do a very robust study. And so I did a mixed methods study that was also longitudinal. I had 13 years of data. I started out by just asking questions through interviews and focus groups saying, how do millennials manage conflict in the workplace? Then I was able to receive data of 11,000 test takers of the Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument. So this defines your conflict mode. So I was able to get that data, and I was able to ask these 2 questions. What are the dominant conflict styles for millennials, Gen Xers, and baby boomers? And then I looked specifically at the conflict styles of same-age millennials to same-age Gen X to have that extra sort of test as to, is this a cohort effect versus an age effect? Because if they're the same age, it has to be a cohort effect. So any questions before I go on as far as the different generations and what I found in that research, or what I presented as far as generations? Okay, I will keep moving along. So stereotypes, we know there are generational differences, but we know stereotypes impact how we perceive each other and can lead to incorrect assumptions. So I'd like to ask for a little participation from the audience and from help from my friends co-hosting this. My first question is, how would you define, and if you could do it in one word, baby boomers? And if you could type that into the chat, just tell me one word as to how you would define baby boomers. And I'll give you a minute to do that. And baby boomers are the ones today that are age 59 to 77. So in 2023, baby boomers age 59 to 77.
So we have a bunch of words coming in: stuck, me, change, inclusive, parents, Fleetwood Mac, 2 words, but acceptable, gold watch, old with a smiley face, resilient, ambitious, 60s, born after World War II, opportunities, retiring, must buy a home, collaborative, hardened, me, boomers, sandwich gen, stable, ducked and cover.
I think
Maybe
that
duck.
was duck.
I think it was duck and cover, but
Duck.
get under those desks. Still seeking change, achieved, self-confident, originally questioning everything, avaricious, well off, retirement, smug.
Interesting.
Homeowners. Yes.
I think
Stoic.
that, oh, go ahead.
Stoic and college grads.
I think that our your group is a little different than most of the groups I speak to, because it was a little bit broader than what I typically hear, which was amazing. But through all the interviews and focus groups I've done, this is what I normally hear. Workaholics, competitive, independent, rule followers, self-assured.
Self-assured, yeah.
Okay. All right. Next. How would you define Gen Xers? Gen Xers in 2023 are age 42 to 58. Gen Xers.
Sarcastic, collaborative, independent, Punky Brewster, forgotten, ambitious, lots of ambitious, stubborn, parenting, Winona Ryder, relaxed, non-traditional, siblings, me, ambitious, self-reliant, MTV, we're trying, we're feral and drank out of a hose, listener, angry. I think I missed a few above that. Ambitious again, cheated, squeezed out, don't understand boomers, polarizing, intolerant and more open to change, workaholic, flexible.
Interesting. This is what I typically hear
I
about.
think we're scoring your research, Cynthia.
Independent, we heard that.
Mhm.
We
There's
did
the
hear
middle
independent.
sandwich, the forgotten generation, the middle child, the latchkey. I don't know how many of you remember this. I went to kindergarten. I had a key. I came home at night and let myself
Let yourself in, yeah.
My mom was working. So these are independent. I think about all these stereotypes that we hear. There's some that are true and there's some that are stereotypes. For example, with the baby boomers, we heard competitive. We'll find in the research I'm going to talk about that of that 11,000 database that baby boomers are collaborative meaning assertive and cooperative, and not competitive, which is assertive and uncooperative. Now with Gen Xers, Gen X themselves denies tech savvy. I often hear tech savvy. They say, no, we didn't have the ability to be in on that. So we don't really think of ourselves as tech savvy. How about millennials? Let's hear what you have to say about millennials, age 23 to 41.
Entitled.
Be entitled. I'm a latchkey kid, grew up and I'm very well adjusted. They are not. Social media has crippled them.
What's chuggy, Alex?
Chuggy is a derisive term that Gen Zs refer to toward millennials.
Oh,
They're too into themselves.
oh, okay, self-involved, okay. Globally conscious, huh? Casual, self-interested, disillusioned, phone obsessed. Self-absorbed again, entitled, social media crippled their minds, non-traditional.
All right. Any
All
others?
right, give us your research, Cynthia.
Here's my research. Entitled.
Entitled, okay. Lazy.
I did an incredible number of focus groups and interviews. Here's what I typically hear. Yeah, I would say
you go ahead.
100% of non-millennials in my interviews and focus group, 100%. And 92% of millennials themselves describe the generation as entitled. So that was an interesting finding. 85% of non-millennials and about 70% of millennials reported millennials as job hoppers, that they like to change jobs quickly. One thing I would challenge is lazy. I do not believe at all that millennials are the least bit lazy. They're one of the hardest working groups. They like to work in their time and in their hours, but they are very hardworking. So the last one I'll have you participate with is Gen Z, about age 6 to 22 in 2023. So a younger generation. So we're really still learning about Gen Z, but just if you have a couple of quick one-word descriptions of how you see Gen Z.
Demanding, promise, lethargic, feelings, digitally immersed, developing, hopeful, non-conformant, spoiled, entitled.
Interesting.
Rude.
Unknowable, idealistic, a new hope, tech quiz, boundaries, anxious, dreamers, inquisitive, innovative, stubborn, rude, concerned, rule breakers, non-traditional, victims of lack of success in creating a healthy world, thinkers, clueless, intelligent, traumatized by current events and future, creative, hopeless, inclusive, lost, free-spirited and non-traditional, innovative, non-resilient, political activist, idealistic, socially lost, creative,
Okay, this is what we typically hear.
nihilistic, anxious.
We do hear a lot of, and some of this is in my book about how anxious younger generations are, and how some of that's brought about by not only social media, but climate change and some of the things they've experienced.
You're going?
Can you hear me?
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
And then, but we normally hear socially conscious, very, very involved in different causes, open-minded, pragmatic, diverse, and really a lot of people believe that these are the true digital natives. So I want to take a quick moment and just look at some of the things that these groups had when they were growing up, because it tells us a little bit about each generation. So baby boomers, prosperous decades following World War II. They had the assassination of President John F. Kennedy, civil rights leader Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy, civil rights protests in the Vietnam War and the anti-Vietnam War demonstrations. So that's the environment they grew up in. What about Gen Xers? Gen Xers are often called the me decade of the 70s. This was a term coined by Tom Wolfe in a New York Times Magazine article, talking about people looking more inward in the 70s. And away from more social movements and the wars. So this is one of the things that's sort of been associated with Gen Xers. Rapid technological expansion. We had Microsoft and Apple, Watergate, birth of the EPA, Arab oil embargo leading to gas shortages, and then the end of the Vietnam War and the Camp David peace accords. Millennials. When I talk to millennials, I can't tell you how many of them were traumatized by the attacks on the World Trade Center and Pentagon. You know, we were all traumatized, but some of these young kids were, you know, in school or in college, you know, for their freshman year and watching this on TV and just being terrified. Wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, World Wide Web debuted, the Enron scandal. So you have all this corporate issues going on with the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers, the Emergency Economic Stabilization Act, seeing their parents get laid off from work, in school shootings. How many times have we seen these frightening images of different teams in a school setting? So, you know, it was a very challenging economic time for millennials growing up. There was Occupy Wall Street that happened, and studies show that 40 to 50% of the people who were participating in the Occupy Wall Street were under the age of 30. So, and then you've got, you know, they kind of got established in their careers, were able to be making progress when the economy recovered, and then the double whammy of the pandemic hit. So it's been very tough for their careers. And then lastly, Gen Z, wars again in Iraq and Afghanistan, school and religious site shootings, legalization of same-sex marriage, climate events, Black Lives Matter, Me Too, Time's Up, And these, again, are the real digital natives. What about parenting styles? Because that really impacts as well. We all have heard about helicopter parents. One study by Summers and Settle reported that 40 to 60% of parents in college campuses are helicopter parents and get involved with their children's job searches their senior years. Generation X, again, the latchkey, underprotective. In baby boomers, it's been described as more nurturing in discussions. I would tell you that we're still learning about Gen Z. My initial findings are parenting is more guiding and flexibility, and I just labeled it more luminary is how I see the parenting style that they're growing up with. So what does that mean in the workplace? These are some things when I tell people they can't believe it, but these are major companies that have done these initiatives in the past. Dow and Merrill Lynch bring parents to the workplace. GE, do you remember the slogan, let us take your son or daughter off your payroll and put them on ours? EY had a parents packet with memory stick. PNC invited parents to recruiting events. Office Depot had a website page for parents. In Enterprise sending letters to parents of candidates offered jobs. So workplaces really got involved with bringing those parents into the workplace. Diversity. I want to talk a little bit about diversity because this has changed so significantly. When the silent generation, and the silent generation were born 1925 to 45, so age 78 to 98 today, when they were 22 to 37, 84% were non-Hispanic white, 84%. Looking at millennials, that share is just 55%. And then when we get to Gen Z, almost 50% are racial or ethnic minorities. So a huge difference. And the change is driven partly by the growing number of Hispanic and Asian immigrants, but we're seeing quite a change in diversity. And so generational differences, what are we looking at? Younger generations, diverse, open-minded, communicate digitally. They're highly, highly educated and have a desire to learn and grow. They want a job that provides purpose, and they question and want to create the rules. Older generations, hardworking, loyal, direct communicators, skilled team players. I'm sorry about that. Skilled team players, they want a job that provides self-worth and they follow the rules. Also, so what are the sources of workplace conflict? We've got these different communication styles. Older generations, much more direct. Younger generations, more indirect or digital. Younger generations wanting feedback much more frequently. That's a big change. Technology divide, with younger generations much more technologically savvy. Workplace preferences, younger generations expressing extreme interest in having flexible workplaces with work-life balance and like to question. So any questions on sort of the backgrounds of those before we go into the conflict styles? Okay, I'll keep moving along. Generational conflict styles and the impact of gender. So looking at generational differences in conflict style can provide us insight on workplace dynamics. And remember, we looked at the generational differences, the key events. So for baby boomers, World War II victory, there were some protests, but this whole, sort of esprit de corps and cooperation and assertiveness, that really equates to more of a collaborative style. So that would be sort of a theoretical assumption. Versus Gen Xers, more individualism in conflict, so more uncooperative and assertive, which would be competitive. And then for millennials, they grew up in this really world of fear and corruption, so less assertive, less cooperative, which would be an avoiding style. So let's see what the data told us. So my interviews and focus groups. Very interesting. Very strong findings that millennials avoid conflict. They don't like direct conflict. It makes them very uncomfortable. More than 3/4 of millennials in my interviews reported that they wanted to avoid conflict. And about 50% of non-millennials said they see millennials avoiding conflict. Interesting finding gender-wise, millennial males were said to be less assertive, which really was a surprising finding that I had not expected, and that millennial females were more assertive. So when I dig into the actual data, I'm going to tell you more about what I found about that. So for those of you not familiar with the Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument, this represents the 5 styles. So on the y-axis, you have assertiveness, and the x-axis, you have cooperativeness. So for example, competing, you'd be highly assertive, but low cooperation, whereas collaborative would be highly assertive with high cooperation, compromising in the middle, avoiding, and then accommodating. So these are the different styles that the Thomas-Kilmann Conflict Mode Instrument tests for when you take the test. This is what I found. So I did find that baby boomers were collaborative, more likely than other generations to be collaborative, but also surprisingly, they had a much more likely tendency to avoid. I would tell you that Gen Xers were found to be more likely to compete, which I expected to find. Millennials, I would tell you that my data had 21 and 22-year-old millennials. So if I look at avoiding decreased significant or increased significantly, 65% as an overall, and then for males, 156%. So if I were to take out the 21 and 22-year-olds in this 13-year data, millennials would have been found more likely to avoid, and they would not have been found likely to compete. So I concluded that was an age factor, and I did more study on same-aged generations to see if that were in fact the case. One thing, do you notice anything in particular about this, which I thought was interesting? Millennials and Gen Xers have no common conflict styles with baby boomers, with the exception of Gen X and baby boomers both unlikely to compromise. So incredible. So you have these different, not only different conflict styles, but no conflict styles in common. So then I want to do the actual same age, because I want to say, what do we really find out? And I did find out that millennials are more likely than Gen X to have more unassertive conflict styles, and that Gen Xers are more likely than millennials to have more assertive conflict styles. So that was shown in the data that was the case. I did then want to talk a little bit more about gender, because gender colors everything, the way we dress, the workplace interactions. 52% of millennial women report males have it easier than females, versus only 37% of Gen X and baby boomers. So a big difference in gender and gender perception. So if I look at the gender analysis for males, my interviews and focus groups, I heard males less assertive. The 13-year conflict styles, I found millennial males are more likely to avoid, and millennial males are more likely to accommodate, which was interesting. And I also found that millennial males are more likely to accommodate in the same age, and Gen X males are more likely to collaborate, which is in compete, which are more assertive. So absolutely confirmed the data on millennial males being less assertive. What about females? Not quite as clear. I did hear in the interviews and focus groups, millennial females more assertive. In the 13-year across, which again had those 21 and 22-year-old females, I did see that millennial and Gen X females are more likely than baby boomers to compete. So we know younger generations are more assertive than the older generations, and millennial females more likely than Gen X to compete in the 13-year. However, when I drilled down on exact same age, I did not find a significant difference in millennial to Gen X in competing, but Gen X are more likely to collaborate, which means it's a more assertive style. So some nuanced findings of Gen X being slightly more likely to have assertive styles than millennials. So gender analysis. One thing that you might have noticed on the past page that 2 styles were significant for millennials, 3 styles for Gen Xers, and 4 styles for baby boomers. So it's interesting because we're seeing a narrowing of gender differences. You know, we've got a lot more gender fluidity in different approaches to gender, but we do see that millennials are more similar in their conflict styles by gender than previous generations. Surprising findings. Some things I heard when I did my interviews and focus groups and asked the same open-ended questions to all the generations. Millennials were more likely to talk about themselves. 73% of the references were about themselves. Asked the exact same questions, 27% of the references, and then 27% of the references were about non-millennials. Asked the same questions, it was just about reversed for non-millennials. Only 26% of the references were about them, and 74% were about millennials. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about work and strategies for success. Any questions on the conflict styles before I proceed?
There were 2 little questions. One person queried about the size of the data set for each of the generational groups that you were using. And then there was a question about how and if you factored in passive aggressive as a style.
Yes, the data was 11,000 participants total, and it was almost equally divided among the 3 generations, not by exact number, but there were 5,000 something, around 5,000 or whatever, the exact same number across the different ages for the different groups. So that was one of my goals when I pulled the data, was to get the same number of generations. And then passive aggressive, what I looked at was conflict styles only related to Thomas-Kilmann. And so it would have been on that chart, the obviously you have the cooperation and the assertiveness, and I strictly looked at that versus trying to deal with other conflict styles as far as passive aggressive. Did that answer that?
I think so. Emily, did you have a question that you wanted to ask now?
Yes, I did have a question. In the previous slide, those 2 pollings kind of indicated some kind of self-awareness. Oh, the slide right after that.
Before or after this?
No, 2 slides before, the questions about where millennials spoke more about themselves versus not about themselves.
Yep.
And so as you were kind of talking about that, I was kind of reflecting on, it kind of indicates a level of self-awareness, right? Of talking about themselves versus talking about others. And so that was kind of making me think, if people are taking the test about themselves, the level of self-awareness in different generations, how are they then taking the test and identifying themselves on the thing? Because if boomers are identifying themselves as collaborative, and then because that may not be my experience, right? Where I don't see the matchup. And so I just was wondering where self-awareness and measuring that comes into play with kind of understanding some of those findings.
Interesting. And I apologize. I should have prefaced this better. These findings were strictly from my interviews and focus groups. There was no test, so they were not taking the Thomas-Kilmann instrument. That was for my quantitative part of it. So this is the qualitative part of my study. And so I had interview questions that were very open-ended. What's important to you in the workplace? What are things that you look for? How do you deal with conflict in the workplace? So that was very open-ended. And it was during those interviews and focus groups, when asked the same questions, that millennials talk more about themselves. Granted, I did present the study as talking about how millennials resolve conflict in the workplace and how different generations, manage conflict in the workplace. But I did find, and there are studies that show a higher level of narcissism in younger generation. Jean Twenge is a very well-known researcher who's done quite a bit of research that found a 30% increase in narcissism in more recent college students versus those from, the early 80s. And so I think some of this just reflects some of that narcissistic or self-focused behavior. Anything else? All right.
There was one question about, oh, sorry, about the racial lines or ethnicity
Yeah,
diversity in your groups, if you could address that.
I did not have diversity. They were diverse, but I don't have the breakdown of what that diversity was. Obviously, the baby boomers would have been a lot less diverse than the younger generations, but I have requested more data from Thomas-Kilmann and have not yet received it. So I apologize that that data is not available, but yes, very interesting question.
And I just had one question about, in the analysis, you seem to be collapsing the Gen X and boomers versus millennials. Is that right?
In some of them, I did millennials to non-millennials in the interviews. And then in the quantitative study, I did all three generations, millennials, Gen X, and baby boomers. But then I did look specifically at millennials and Gen X, because millennials and Gen X are the only two that had similar age groups. As you think about it, millennials were so much younger and baby boomers were so much older that there is no data that shows how those two compare at the same age. But I was able to at least gather data showing millennials to Gen X as far as looking at those two groups from a statistical analysis standpoint. Did that answer that question?
Yes, thank you.
See, one more hand raised.
Yeah, can I go back a step? I didn't get to interject this at the right moment, but in the word cloud, the same word appeared multiple times. So for example, for Gen Z, the word diverse appears, I counted at least 11 times. That's an uncommon way to deal with word clouds. Can you explain what's going on in the word clouds?
Yeah, the word cloud just, it had you put in the frequency of hearing something, and then it put size and repetition in based on how often you heard that.
No, I understand that's the typical way, but if diverse appears 13 separate times, it suggests that none of them reflects the additive number of the times the word diverse is done.
Yeah, I can go back and look at that. I know that diverse was mentioned significant number of times. So I can go back to the word cloud creator and try to make sure that that's reflected properly. So thank you for pointing that out.
Okay, thanks.
So strategies for success.
We have one more hand up. Harvey Newman raised his hand.
Yes, Cynthia, this is fascinating to me, but I'm just concerned about what you're calling narcissism or self-focusing. Could that be a sign of increasing consciousness on the part of this generation?
You know, absolutely. And I think a lot of how we talk about things, we talk about entitled. To me, entitled means, you know, it can also be perceived as having high expectations, you know. And would you rather have somebody with high expectations or low expectations working for you? Self-focus, self-awareness. So they're all very intertwined. So, you know, some of these are things that we hear. I mean, I know that my studies have not been on narcissism. There are some researchers that really focus on that, but I do think that there is a fine line, but certainly there is more focus on self, whether that's self-awareness, self-focus, narcissism. I think is sometimes used a little bit too broadly, but those are some of the studies. So I think that there definitely is more of a focus on self-awareness.
So give me a little bit more optimism for our future. Thank you.
Yes, I'll conclude in the end, but I feel extremely optimistic about our future with the generations we have coming.
We have one more question from Denise.
Yes, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yes, I find that working with millennials, what they do is they capitalize on social media instead of thinking about the problem themselves. That's the difference between us and them. We look at the overall picture, whereas the overall picture is, let me get on Twitter and see what's going on. That's the difference.
Yeah. There's a very strong tendency towards social media use in the younger generations. They will use it as a sounding board. They will go out there and talk about their conflict. They will, if they have a conflict with their boss, they sometimes will seek help or information from others. But yes, definitely more of a use of social media versus how some of the other generations resolve things.
Alex?
Yeah, I want to make a note. So I watch a bit of TikTok. I have been recently. And so one of the sort of memes or videos that I see is a scene where the pushy boss asks the employee to put in extra hours, and the Gen Z polite employee refuses, saying, "This is my time." And this is to this entitlement point. As a Gen Xer, that is so, I find that so sort of disagreeable watching it, because my generation has been raised on making sure you put in the FaceTime and make sure you put in that extra effort for that promotion, et cetera. And to see that value shift flip completely, where it's now inappropriate to ask that, is a moment when I definitely find a generational chasm between my values and the ones that I see. So I'm curious, Cynthia, if you can comment on that.
Yes, I do definitely see a difference in generations. I'll talk a little bit further on. We're getting a little bit ahead of ourselves as far as work-life balance and what's important to younger generations. But yes, I have CEOs and heads of companies coming to me all the time and saying, how can I get my younger employees to work 60, 70 hours a week like I did? How can I get them to earn it? You probably won't, but they'll work smarter, not harder. So, the ability of younger generations to set boundaries on work-life balance is very strong, and it's very good. I think some of the older generations are learning from that, quite frankly, about the healthiness involved with that, and then the reinvigoration you have when you come back to the workplace. But it is a shift. It's definitely a shift where you have to deal with different expectations in the workplace. Did that answer your question, Alex?
Thank you. Yeah. And I look forward to more of your comments.
Okay, perfect. Okay, moving ahead, workplace engagement. These are things you probably already know, but we've seen employee engagement in the US decrease from a high of 36% in 2020. It had been slowly increasing from about 2010. We got up to 36%. Now it's back down to 32% in 2022. But even more discouraging is 18% of employees are actively disengaged, just at work, a fifth of our workplace, just getting through the day, not even engaged. Younger workers also, according to research by Deloitte, experience a greater decrease in engagement and an increase in disengagement. And then 40% of Gen Zs in a recent study and 24% of millennials would like to quit their job in the next 24 months. And a third would do so without finding another job. So what's important to these younger generations? Social causes and value-added work. These are key things. Millennials believe a company's success should encompass more than simply financial gain. That's not the most important thing. In the interviews and focus groups, when I ask people what they want out of work, 62% said they want to contribute and add value to a larger cause. 62% of millennials. And social causes were mentioned by 50% of millennials and 15% of non-millennials, just spontaneously, things that they wanted to be involved with. For example, Rebecca, who is a human resource manager for a very large manufacturer in the Southeast, said, I said, what is important to you in a work environment? She said, value-added work, right? Things where I feel I'm contributing to something bigger than myself is really important to me, and knowing I'm helping other people to be successful. So, that's a key factor for younger employees. Also, 36% of millennials and 37% of Gen Zs will actually reject a job offer based on personal ethics if it conflicts with their ethics. And 50% of Gen Zs and 46% of millennials are advocating for employer action on climate. If there's a purpose at work, if you have a social cause or allow your employees to get involved in social causes and they're contributing to society overall, they will really stay engaged. Flexibility, we keep talking about, they want flexibility, and how do I accommodate this? Abe, one of my interview participants, was a manager of a large retail chain. And he was so frustrated with an employee that he was trying to accommodate. And he obviously in retail needs someone to be there because, you know, you're in a retail store, and he kept pushing the hours back further and further. So then he said we'd come to the agreement he could work in the evenings because it would be easier for him to get to work. And then he still kept coming late to work. And so we bumped it back further and still late to work. And it got to the point where he was late a remarkable number of times. I don't know how you can be late that number of times. I'm just, yeah. I mean, he was totally flummoxed as to how to get his workers to work. For my interviews and focus groups, talking about this flexibility in time, 55% of millennials were late for my interviews by an average of 35 minutes. So 55% late by an average of 35 minutes. One millennial was late by 8 minutes and apologized profusely. Alternatively, when you talk to millennials, over 50% of millennials describe baby boomers as rigid in resisting change. So, you know, it's obviously just a different style. Hybrid remote work and work-life balance. So 49% of Gen Zs and 45% of millennials are working remotely at least some of the time, obviously aided by the COVID pandemic and our new structure. Now, there are a lot of different remote schedules. Some are 3 days a week, 1 day a week, 4 days a week, but at least half of them almost are working remotely some of the time. 76% of millennials and 75% of Gen Zs prefer hybrid or remote work. That's how they prefer to work. But I would tell you, it's when you work, not just where you work. So it's important to realize that not everyone wants to work 8 to 5. So even though we've said to some employees, yes, you can work from home, if you're making them work from home and be on the computer and interacting from 8 to 5, that still may not be what they want. If you have the ability to say, if you work the best from noon until 8 or 9 at night, fine, go for it. That's sometimes when you get the most productivity. Another thing I want to talk about is 39% of millennials report work-life balance is important in selecting an employer. We were talking, Alex, about work-life balance. So 39% say that that's the main factor they look at when they're selecting where they're going to work. 31% say they're very satisfied today with their work-life balance. So that's gone up from 20% in 2019. And then other key employer selection factors include 29% say learning and development is very important in selecting an employer, and 27% pay. So pay is not the main factor. It's lower. The most important thing is work-life balance. So, you know, that's going to be something they're going to be looking at. Also, millennials want a learning environment. Millennials are the most highly educated cohort with a higher percent of college education than any other cohort. So they want to learn and grow, and they like critical thinking. You know, in college, we think this is a very good thing. People learn to critically, to reason, to think, to analyze something, to question it. And yet in the workplace, this is sometimes considered a negative. 68% of millennials provided with learning plan to be with that employer next year. So that's how important it is for people, for millennials, that they want to learn and they want to grow, and not sitting in a conference room hearing a static lecture, but interactive training. Also, millennials along this critical thinking want to know why. Jay, a supervisor, he was a millennial supervisor, but he says, you tell them to do something in work and they question you about it. Why do I have to do this? And they're not like, okay, you're my boss, I should listen to what you say. They want to question stuff. Similarly, Janelle, who is an attorney, who is a Gen Z or Gen X, excuse me, said, when it comes to you're going to do this, you're going to do this, and you're going to do this, I think we're more likely to hear why. Why do we have to do it this way? So millennials are more apt to want to engage in role innovation, really changing a role so that it suits their needs and being able to define as best they can how they complete the tasks. So what can you do? If you explain the workflow process, how many of us have been in businesses where we get these processes and we know our little part of it is to do this, this, and this, and we just do our little part? For millennials, it's like, how does this relate to the bigger picture? What is that big picture? How does my part fit in? And is there a better way to do this? So if you provide opportunities for input, you could not only get more, happier workers, but a more efficient workplace. Looking at feedback, this was a vice president for a large communications company. When I asked what millennials want in the workplace, says they want recognition and they value supervision. They crave feedback. Interesting. And then Angie, who is a millennial supervisor, says, so I'm constantly have to tell myself that you have to reinforce them, constantly having to give feedback. So I thought that's interesting because millennials' desire for feedback was mentioned by over 50% of the millennials in my study. They said that they really want more feedback, they crave feedback. For baby boomers and Gen X's, we grew up with this annual performance review. We didn't have this frequent feedback. And so, this is something new in the workplace. What I would tell you is there are performance apps that provide more frequent feedback. They can work off preset goals, and you can set those goals so that employees can't request feedback every day to give yourself the ability to manage it, but they can request feedback on certain pre-scheduled times. And it works very well. And companies such as GE, Microsoft, Accenture, and Adobe have actually transitioned to this. And I don't have experience with these apps, but I wanted to provide the names of some of these, the PerformYard, Trackster, ReviewSnap, Bambi, and Synergita. I think you all know or have heard of GE's former annual performance review that actually was called the Rank and Yank, because you actually were ranked in the company. And if you were not ranked high enough, you knew you had to leave. Entitled. I just wanted to spend a minute talking about this. Millennials are entitled, according to Abe, and therefore assume that within a few months they can be a leader or a manager, regardless of how much they've actually learned, just because. And Kelly, an executive, said, so the folks that are older tend to feel like they've had to work harder to earn what millennials feel like they deserve, and they want it because they think they put in a certain amount of time and now they should get it. I would say that we talked about the fact that 100% of non-millennials describe millennials as having entitled or high expectations, but 85% of non-millennials and 62% of millennials themselves reported that millennials are impatient and will leave if their expectations are not met. So again, as we talked before, high expectations, is that a bad thing? I'd rather have someone working for me that's got high expectations than low expectations. So, it's just a matter of how you manage it in the workplace and how you can meet those expectations. So what are strategies for success? You can actually offer millennials to lead a work group that provides leadership opportunities. And it could be, you could brainstorm with the employee on assignment of interest. It could be work related, or it could be a social cause. They may have a social cause or a climate cause that they're really interested in that they could lead, but they could lead a work group, but do not simply add more work without compensation, because that's not going to go over well. Lastly, I want to end up talking about the fact that millennials feel judged. I think this is important, that we've got a whole generation of incredibly talented, smart, bright, resourceful, socially conscious individuals that feel judged. And 50% of the millennials in my study reported feeling this way. I had a comment by one of the, she was in the art business in the Southeast, and she said, I feel there's a lot of external judgment about the generation that I don't feel that previously Gen Xers experienced. I find in the workplace, it's almost like the word millennial is discriminatory. And I think that's very sad. So again, things we do. If we have a positive work environment and culture, we can make employees feel cared about. I think that's very important. Some companies have it and some don't. Some you walk in and the culture is great and others don't. And it typically comes from the top down. Provide recognition, take time to recognize people. Open communication. I do half-day workshops when I do these trainings to talk about listening, asking questions, seeking to understand and observe, and embrace diversity. It really provides different perspectives and more robust outcomes. Also, recognize your assumptions and stereotypes. We all have them. We can't help it. But if you can recognize them, you don't get trapped into pre-existing behaviors or interactions just based on your initial stereotype or assumption. Recognize your conflict and communication style. I think this is very important. We have so many different conflict styles and communication styles. If you start to really be aware of what yours is, and if you're working within your group and you understand what other people's are, it really helps understanding and communication. Ensure manageable workloads. I think that's important. And then in summary, I just have this one side by side that talks in general about what people want in the workplace. Millennials, they want benefit choice, PTO, they want to know why, they desire feedback, they have high expectations and will leave if that's not met. They want flexibility and they want minimal conflict. Gen X, very interested in how much money they're going to make, work-life balance, more vacation time, the 401k plan, they're self-reliant, and you should resist micromanaging Gen Xers. They work very well independently. Baby boomers, again, salary is important, health insurance, retirement, strong work ethic. They're going to earn what they feel they need to. Delayed retirement, we saw an uptick in retirements during COVID. We think some of these baby boomers are now re-entering the workplace, and they're interested in visibility. Visibility is very important to them. Any questions before I go into a really brief case study, and then we can open it up to more broad questions? Is there a hand up? Lisa?
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It's very insightful and helpful. I had two quick questions. One, whether you have looked at emotional intelligence as a construct in the different generations, and how that may be understood along, you know, it's probably a concept that wasn't even maybe articulated as much during the baby boomer era, but it seems like it would be relevant. And then the second thing I have is I feel like a strong emphasis in your presentation, and I will, you know, declare myself as a Gen X here, is it seems that we are supposed to be accommodating the millennials. And as a professor, I struggle very much. I do what I can to accommodate a different way of being. But one of the things I really struggle with is this idea of just showing up late, the level of casualness. And the reason I struggle with it is I teach law, and I know the culture of that profession. And I also know that you can lose a case if you don't follow the rules. And quite frankly, it feels like a disrespect of my time as a very busy person. And so those seem like values that are worth teaching and learning about on the part of the millennials. And I try to explain that to them as a part of their professional development. So I'm curious how you view, well, first the emotional intelligence, but also the perspective of the millennials trying to work. The Gen X trying to work with the millennials.
Yes. I've actually started some work on emotional intelligence with a colleague. I have not integrated or formalized it into any of my studies yet. So I would say that's a future to be forthcoming. As far as accommodating millennials, I know I hear a lot from people that it's very difficult to accommodate millennials. I do think that there is a fine line. I think that, when I teach, because I also teach in a business college, I make it very clear, if you're not here by a certain period of time, that's an absence. You get so many absences, that's going to count towards your grade, or, in a negative way. And I think certain careers like law require much more prompt attendance and attention to those things. So I do think that there's a way to set expectations in the workplace for these things to happen. So if you say you have to be at work, between 9 and 11, and they're showing up to 11:30, you have to deal with that. But, where you can set accommodations, it helps. Not only for millennials, but Gen Zs are going to be the same. And it's going to be baby boomers who are more, strict and more coming in, and Gen X that have been more strict about coming on time and following the rules. I would tell you that I hear a lot that the older generations are rule followers and the younger generations want to create the rules. So I think we have to learn how to accommodate millennials while setting boundaries. And some of my work now is around how to set boundaries, how to properly set those boundaries.
Which has to do with emotional intelligence, in my opinion. So I'm glad to hear you're doing that work. Thank you so much. Okay.
All right.
A question from Carol Mason.
Thank you. And first, this is very, very helpful, particularly the part about them always asking why. It's helping me now think about that differently. But what I wonder about is if your research looks into the fact that I'm a boomer, a late boomer. It's my generation who raised these millennials to be the way they are, yet we have different expectations of them in the workplace when we created them. And I'm wondering if you've thought about that dynamic at all.
Well, we've talked about the environment in which they were raised and how those traits and characteristics, those unique traits, go into the workplace. One of those is helicopter parenting. Obviously, the need for more frequent feedback, the sometimes need for acceptance of fluidity and getting away with things. I mean, it depends on the level of helicopter parenting, but there are definitely ties between the way they were raised and those traits that now have come into the workplace.
But my question is, but when we're in the workplace, we're not understanding that generation that we created.
Right.
And I find that dichotomy interesting, and wondering if you ever raised that or thought about that.
Yeah. I have not specifically studied that, but I do think that there is a lack of understanding, even though they may have been raised by us, there's a lack of understanding of that. But that's an interesting, I'm making a note about your point, because I think that's an interesting point. So thank you for raising it.
And a question from Kimberly Roberts. Kimberly.
Carol was actually heading in the same direction as myself, where I was curious on the numbers to see how the previous generation's parenting style impacted the later generations working in conflict style, and also trying to understand that within the younger generations that they're not all, it's not a one size fits all, because there are some Gen Xers, some millennials, some even Gen Zs where they don't identify with those. And I just wonder if you had any data that spoke to its parenting style.
Yeah, I think, and we've tied the parenting style. For example, Gen X, they grew up with latchkey, more independent. Their styles and how they come across are more independent, more competitive. Millennials, more helicopter parenting, more nurturing, more taking care of. They are more self-focused. They are more avoidant. They're used to people advocating and taking care of things for them. Baby boomers, they grew up in an area that was more, victorious after World War II and prosperous, and they have a certain style. So there are ties to those parenting styles that are included within the traits and characteristics of the formative years that impact the way that these generations develop these traits and characteristics that they then bring into the workplace. including conflict style. And I do think one point that is very important is there is no one size that fits all. These are looking at trends. These are, people that are more likely or less likely overall, but obviously everyone is different. There'd be some millennials who will show up for work even earlier on time, and other baby boomers who will be late for work. So, I mean, it's always no generalization, and there's no one size fits all, but we're just trying to look at trends and look at what we see about generations in general. And that's what this research addresses. Did that answer
Thank you
your
for that.
question?
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Mhm. Anyone else?
Let's see, Harvey has his hand up.
Yep, I see Harvey now.
Yeah, since we're talking about intergenerational, I'm wondering if you've looked into any of the work that's being done on intergenerational trauma that may be affecting all of this.
I have not looked at intergenerational trauma. Have you? It's
Yes, yes. I suggest strongly a book called It Didn't Start With You. I'm trying to think of the author's name. It's Mark, I think it's something like Mark Boyle or something like that.
Uh-huh.
And they're finding that within many generations, trauma seems to follow within that, and they're not certain whether it's passed on genetically or just within the framework of the family itself. But
Go ahead.
Yeah, but it's a very important issue that we're neglecting very often.
Yes, I've done some work on patterns that we develop. A lot of the theories proposed and used by the Hoffman Institute, patterns we develop that we get from our parents that we carry, throughout our lives, and how those impact us. So that continues to be an area of interest.
Yeah, thank you, Nikki, for put it into the chat. Very
Absolutely.
good.
Non-Amazon link
you're
coming.
really on top of things. You're so great. Okay, thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Emily?
Cynthia, I'd love to hear your thoughts on, the word entitled gets used a lot in describing millennials. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that term being used as a coping mechanism for change, because some of the things that you're talking about are good things, millennials asking for more feedback. That's a great tool for the workplace, right? More conversations, more higher feedback loops, those are healthy wellness tools in the workplace. And so, but yet it gets kind of categorized as entitled. And so I'd love to hear kind of some of your thoughts behind that language.
Yeah, and a lot of it, when we look at those word charts, when I look at the millennial words that I often hear, a lot of them have more negative connotations. And I'd like to see entitled replaced altogether with, high expectations. So I do think that a lot of it is the stereotypes, the words we put on there, and that sort of sets the tone. But obviously, I do feel that I think the younger generations having high expectations is a very positive thing. You've probably heard the story. There was a company that needed to develop an internal website. They went out to bid, and the bids were $1 million to develop this website. A bunch of younger employees got together, heard about it, went to management, said, we can build this. They built it for $250,000. Save that company $750,000. I mean, the potential, and I think the beautiful thing is all these generations working together are going to can create the most efficient, effective workplace. It's just really understanding, spending time, breaking down the stereotypes, understanding roles, expectations, culture, communication, conflict styles, so that everyone operates more efficiently together. But yeah, I do think that entitled is definitely overused.
Isaac?
Is Isaac on mute?
Yes. No,
Oh, Isaac, how are you? It's nice to see you.
we can't hear you, Isaac.
Isaac, you have to take yourself off mute.
He's
Hello,
not
can you hear me
unmuted.
now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
All right, sorry about that. All right, well, I'm trying to find out whether you want to expand your research to elsewhere, including perhaps European generations and Asian generations, to see whether these trends you found out in the US still stands there. That would be really interesting, to generalize how different ethno-religious and geographical regional generations feel about all these trends. Thank you.
Yeah, it's very interesting that you mentioned that, Isaac, because I am very interested in doing that. I've done some preliminary research as far as literature reviews, and I found some incredible similarities, surprisingly, between different countries with millennials. But it is an area of strong interest of mine that I hope to pursue at some point in the near future. So thank you for bringing that up.
Sadia? Ahmed?
Yeah, just a kind of a comment on what others have said, and I'm speaking as a millennial, so I'll put that out there. It's interesting to me that, that word entitled was thrown around quite a bit. And so for context, I work full-time as a diversity and inclusion director. It's interesting to me that, and not just that term, but like other terms used, negative terms used to describe millennials and other generations. I was thinking, if we were to take those words and apply it to a certain racial group, gender identity, sexual orientation, religious group, that would be condemned 100% right then and there, which I think 100% it should be. But it's interesting to me that when we're talking about generational differences, there's a certain acceptance with using negative terms. Like, to your point, we could say high expectations as opposed to entitled, right? But like, it's just interesting to me that for whatever reason, with generational differences and diversity, we feel more comfortable using more negative terminology that we wouldn't with other identity groups. So I was just curious kind of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I actually find it disconcerting, particularly with younger generations. Obviously you see the boomer memes and you see the younger ones. So it does go back and forth, but I think we've gotten to the point of focusing more on the negatives, and millennials feel it and younger generations feel it. I think it's unfortunate. But the words that come, just to clarify, the words that come, the entitled, the job hoppers, it comes almost the same amount of time from millennials themselves as from non-millennials. So whether they've just heard it and feel it, or they actually are experiencing it as well. So it's more of a global putting out there how we talk about each other, because we can certainly, and I talk in my research about turning it from entitled to high expectations and what that really means. So I think that's one of the things that I think needs to be focused on more, because it can be very negative. Alec?
Yes, thank you for your great presentation. I have a question about, kind of the way that, this conflict management actually happens in the workplace, right? So in HR, I'm an HR consultant. You see a lot of kind of downstream performance improvement plans, things like that, all these downstream efforts. And of course, they have their place, right? At the same time, we know that more upstream preventative, efforts are really where the return on investment is. You build culture while improving performance, that kind of thing. So I'm wondering what exactly, that might look like, right? For me, one of the things that I do with my clients is, I advise them, have a mediation between the bosses, the employees, that kind of thing. Come up with an individual accountability plan, right? The millennials or the Gen Zs can get their individual needs and interests met. And at the same time, the mediation allows a vehicle for addressing more of the broader collective interests, right? The business interests, KPIs, bottom lines, preferences among others on the team, that kind of thing, right? So I'm curious what your thoughts might be on that.
Yeah, I actually, I do mediations in the workplace when there is a specific issue to be resolved. But from a broader perspective, when I work with companies on conflict in the workplace, we look at, I sometimes start, with senior management, and we look at all sorts of things such as, what are you looking at? What's the average pay? What are some of the issues you're dealing with? One of the companies I met with, they were having trouble recruiting and retaining younger employees because their workplace was very hierarchical. We looked at revision to mission and vision, modifications to workplace hours, changes to training and development to make it more interactive, apprenticeship programs. So we do all sorts of things. And then I do training where I can take employees all into these different sessions, and we can take the TKI, we can understand what our conflict style is. And just that interaction in these training programs that I do, people just it's a fun environment. They're having fun. They're learning about communication styles, about key requirements for success. I have them all develop their own action plans. We talk about culture. What is the culture? How would you define it? And how do you want it to be defined? And so it's more of an interactive process that takes place over time, where you can actually go in and work within an organization to kind of work towards these goals of accommodating all of your employees and having a better understanding of how each of you works and how to get along in a more efficient way.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Maria?
For the moment.
Do you want, I don't know what your time frame is. I can quickly do a 5-minute of the case study. I kind of talked a little bit about it there, but I can do the case study, or we can conclude. It's entirely up to you.
We have a 10 o'clock hard stop.
Okay.
So we have 5 minutes left.
Okay. I'll just, if anyone's interested, I'll just run through the case study real quickly just to give them a better idea. I was talking a little bit about a technology company in the Southeast that was facing high turnover and low morale. The average age of managers was about 58. They were struggling recruiting and retaining employees, hierarchical structure, and they had transitioned to COVID to virtual work, but had since reopened the workplace. So I met with senior management, and we put together strategies to engage employees and provide opportunities for input. And a lot of what we looked at were social causes or causes of interest for engagement. We went to employees to find out what those were. Changes to training and development, modifications to hours and structure, revisions to the mission and vision to more reflect the current environment, broader recruiting efforts. We really broadened where and how we were recruiting, apprenticeship programs to bring people in before we hired them to see the workplace, and then strengthening exit interviews. We needed to really learn why people were leaving. And then I did this more global training where we had people complete the TKI instrument to identify their styles, and people be really surprised, like, oh, I didn't know that was how I did it. Sessions on communication styles and key requirements for success. Sessions on role definition. I have employee define their role, and then their coworkers define their role, and then look at how the employer defined their role. You might have 3 totally different role definitions. Look at culture. How would you define your culture, both preferred and existing? And then action plans. Everyone put together action plans to achieve a more positive work environment. We measured this by doing a repeat employee survey, which showed an increase in morale, and we kept track of the turnover rates, which also went down. But that's just a very brief, quick review of some of the programs that can be implemented to provide a more positive and productive workplace. So that's the end of my discussion. I want to thank you so much for inviting me to be here with you today. It's been such a pleasure, and thank you for all your research suggestions and all your questions. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. This was terrific. We have about a minute left. Any final question from anyone?
I just want to say that one of the biggest debates that went on in the chat was the difference between high expectations and entitled.
Yay.
And I have another response to that. I hope many of us have high expectations, but we don't always feel that we're entitled to special recognition. So although people wanted to kill the word entitled, I do think there's a distinction there between high expectations, high goals, and I deserve it.
Yes, and I agree. I think there definitely is a distinction. And I do think that sometimes when we say entitled regarding millennials, when I dig down and I ask, what do you really mean? I really find out that they mean that they have high expectations. Other times it's that they're entitled. So I think there's a nuance there in trying to figure out if it is, I just deserve it because I'm who I am and I've been here 3 months, versus I really want to promote, to be, to progress and to learn more. So there is a fine line, and I think it's up to us to sort of dig down and figure out what that is. It's not always entitled, but sometimes, yes, it is.
On the end of that note, you're absolutely right. Our generation is different from millennials and Gen Xers. The key is social media. And once you tap into that and bring it to the workplace, it's totally different, but it's what they're used to. Our time has ended. Theirs is just beginning.
Yeah.
I just have one question. I know this is an enormous topic. Thank you so much. But have you noticed, we didn't talk at all about politics, the different politics between the generations, and do you see hope going forward because the millennials, the generations coming forward might be more diverse and open? Do you see any hope around that?
I think it depends on how you define hope, but I would say that younger generations are much more democratic and socialistic, much more involved in caring about social concerns, about help, medical care for the needy, housing, and things to help parts of our populations that need it. So I do see a very, very strong change. I've got quite a bit of research. Part of that is in my book about the different approaches to politics and the political affiliations and how those have changed. Also, the voting, younger generations have come out in great numbers to vote. They were, said to be pivotal in the election of Barack Obama, in that election, and in some of the congressional elections we've had more recently. So yes, I do think there's been more political involvement, and there's definitely been a change in political affiliation.
And with
Thank
that,
you
thank you
very much,
again so
Dr.
much,
Cynthia.
Cynthia. This has been absolutely fabulous. We are going to turn off the recording. And Cynthia, would you be willing to hang around for another few minutes for any informal chat for anyone who has an additional comment or question?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to.
Great. Okay, thank you everyone for coming. See you next month. And Nikki, can you turn the recording off?
Absolutely.
And now our informal